evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is John Fields, and I'm the interim director of the UAB Visual Arts Gallery, where tomorrow we will be unveiling an exhibition by Mr. Bob Adelman called The Children's March. Just a couple of thanks and a brief introduction before our guest takes the stage. Thank you to Dr. Rebecca Bach, one of our associate deans here in the College of Arts and Sciences, the chair of the Department of Art and Art History, Lauren Lake, our administrative associate, Laura Merrill, and my gallery assistant, Christina McCoo, all of whom were very instrumental in bringing this exhibition to life. I was not yet born when Bob Adelman photographed most of the images that you'll see tonight. However, my parents and grandparents definitely were. In many ways, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a household where the idea of race was never even really addressed. It was from my classmates in elementary school that I learned a person's opinion of another human being could be based solely on things like the pigment in one's skin, the amount of money a family had, or even the fact that one might speak with a lisp. There seems to be a slight disconnect from the events depicted in Mr. Adelman's photographs and many of the young people I teach here at UAB today. On one side, it's comforting to know that many of our city's youths do not seem to hold to those old notions of division that were so prevalent during the time of my parents and grandparents. But it's crucial that we remind them and ourselves that not very long ago, the city was consumed by ignorance and hatred. The basic human rights that many of us here today enjoy from day one of our lives had to be fought for, earned, and at times paid for at the highest cost. I've met and worked with many artists over the past 10 years of my career, and this exhibition is probably the most challenging show I've ever curated. But it has certainly been the most rewarding. Working with Bob over the last several months has been tremendously educational and inspirational. And while much has changed in Birmingham, Alabama over the past 50 years, the relevance of these photographs has not diminished one bit. Bob is a gifted photographer, and not only are these images visually striking, but they literally help to change the world. And ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a great honor to introduce to you now my friend, Mr. Adelman.
Well, I'm very flattered, thank you. I wasn't sure who you were talking about. I had qualms about coming here in a strange way because as important and I guess history changing the Birmingham demonstrations were and my coverage of it, I felt, well, you know, these people have changed. Bunch is, you know, it's 50 years ago. It's a new day, but in a certain other way, it's rubbing a wound that probably can never be healed. So I'm a guest here, and I hope I don't say anything that hurts anybody's pride or feelings, but this time I really was here only for a few days. I was a young, struggling photographer. I had come here indirectly. CORE and SNCC had organized in Tennessee a march. A man named Noah, a postman, had this idea to march from Chattanooga to Mississippi, where I guess he grew up. And he had a picket sign that said, "Eat it, Joe's, black and white." And he got from Chattanooga to someplace in Alabama where he was shot down. And a group of people from Corn and SNCC immediately wanted to and did begin a march, a memorial march. And one of the organizers here, Diane Nash, picked up the march where he was shot. And I think in a certain way, why was that so important? Well, because segregation, which was in many ways the most un-American thing I ever heard of, was based on, it was an organized system of terror. It started at the end of the federal occupation of the South. The South re-won the Civil War by subjugating, once again subjugating our black brothers and sisters. And I mean, I think it was politely referred to as the separation of the races. There was a code of behavior that had to be followed by members of both races, but the underlying assumption was that whites were superior and blacks were inferior, which is, of course, it's wrong, but it's inaccurate and devastating to the minds and hearts of people. It was a very, very cruel system. But anyway, the movement felt that any time there was an act of terror, it could not stand. It had to be opposed. And so the immediate marching of people, both in Tennessee and here in Alabama, was kind of where I entered the picture. Now, I was a young photographer working for CORE. I was very, very taken with the brilliance and imagination that was involved in the civil rights movement. The central idea really was that black bodies, which had been the focus of and the object of enslavement, brutality, murder, were to be used to break up this system of segregation. And so young people who, I think, why was that necessary? Well, because we all see this right now. The country was frozen. The Supreme Court had said in '54 that the Voting Rights Act was, the school segregation was unconstitutional. But not much changed from '54 to the early '60s. I guess there had been a successful bus boycott in Montgomery. But the young people started the sit-ins, and to me it was so imaginative. I was very idealistic, and here was a way that people, just by asserting their rights, could begin to change things. And it created a kind of a fever amongst young people. I was just at the March on Washington, the 50th anniversary, and a lot of people saying, where are the young people? Well, that fever hasn't caught them, and I guess they're so weighed down with paying tuition, I don't know that it can worry about it. Anyway, so this fever had seized us all, and it seemed that changing this horrible system was somehow in our hands. And I think that fever caught the young people here. But anyway, we'll get to those events. But anyway, I went on freedom rides, and this was one that I'm trying to explain how I got here. And this was one of my, this is graffiti written on a bus window on a freedom ride bus. And this is a man named Jim Peck, who was a friend of mine and one of the core leaders, and had been on the Freedom Ride, which came to Birmingham in, I guess it was '62, and he was on a Trailways bus, and we now know that the police had given the Klan 15 minutes to have their way with the Freedom Riders, and Jim was so badly beaten that he had 55 stitches in his face and was just borderline alive. So I just being here in Birmingham, I wanted to remember Jim Peck, who came from a very privileged life. His family owned Peck and Peck, and was a man of great conscience, and anyway, we all are in debt to him. Very decent man. And I went on these demonstrations. This is in Washington, and this is the kind of thing that you saw. I mean, these crazy people with these disgusting picket signs. And this is in front of, these are both in front of the White House. Anyway, here we are with the Eda Joes. These are 10 of our finest young men who journeyed from Chattanooga to the Alabama state line, and there was a very spiritual quality about this. They stayed at a church one night, but at the end of the day, they always sang, "We shall overcome." And it was a terrifying experience. There were, this is Equal Rights for All, Mississippi or Bust. That was, and these are, you know, as you can see all these cars, people were, in Alabama particularly, were eager to get their hands on these fellows. And these are two of the marchers dialoguing and trying to explain why they're there. And there was a lot of singing because it gave us courage, but this is what the bunch of rowdies followed them along the highway. And it was a very frightening experience. And one of them got popped. And this is one of my favorites. I don't know who this man was, but he was, I guess, a country fellow. And the expression on his face always struck me as, well, these were very extraordinary events that we weren't all used to at that time. And the boys got arrested. I think that's a man named Lingo, who was the head of the Alabama State Police. And they were hauled off and stayed in jail for 7 or 8 weeks for walking along the edge of the highway. Well, and this is Eric Weisberg, who fasted for 40, I think it was 6 weeks or so. Just to give you a sense of how committed and dedicated these young men were, what fine people they were. And there's moi. It's not. This is taken a year or two later, but as you, Dr. King used to joke with me whenever he saw me, and he would say, "Did you sell any?" Because but it was quite practical. You carried those cameras because you were afraid to run out of film, and so you had several available. And then we didn't have zoom lenses then, so we had to have a short range, and telephoto and wide angle and normal lenses. Anyway, now I guess here is what Birmingham was, the events in Birmingham were all about. As I said, these signs were not just we who are in charge, we who have power don't want to have anything to do with you. It's also there is a code and acts of terror were used by the police and by the Klan to enforce them. And it was the great economist Gunnar Myrdal, I think he would won a Nobel Prize, did a very important book in the 1940s called The American Dilemma. And in it he said that segregation was the most un-American thing one could imagine, but most people didn't know what it was or what it was like. And in a profound way, with the civil rights movement, what we did, and particularly the photography did, was to show America what this despicable, ugly, destructive system was and why it must end immediately. I mean, that was our view. But the pictures showed that this was wrong, and there was no way to treat our fellow citizens. Anyway, I came up to Birmingham. My recollection now is that I called Fleming, who was the Newsweek reporter, gave me a ride to, because we had heard that there was some events going on. I really didn't have much handle on it, but I guess I had good instincts because I stayed at the Gaston Hotel, which was, I guess, the only non-segregated facility here in Birmingham. And I used to, in the few days that I was here, I'd have breakfast with Doc and Joan Baez, and we all sort of met. And it was the first time I got to talk at some length with Dr. King. And socially, when you met him, he was a very modest, soft-spoken person. I don't know how many people know this, but his religious conviction were that he was a personalist, which means that anyone, any human being that you encounter is an aspect or embodiment of God. So when you spoke to him, you got his full attention, and of course, he was very, very careful and thoughtful in what he said. but he also loved to laugh. He was always kidding me about my cameras and he because I would shoot rolls of film. He was always asking me if there was really film in the camera because I kept going at it. Anyway, let's I guess get into. At this time, I guess the steel mills, which were run by I think what they call the big mules, was still running. And I don't know if this brings back any memories to people. I guess Birmingham at this time in the 60s was the industrial center of the South, and it was a very unique place for steel making because I gathered that coals, ore, and there was all existed here. And it probably would still be a steel, it's one of the strangest things. America has these raw materials, but U.S. Steel decided to get out of the steel business and into the oil business, and as a result, both in Birmingham and Pittsburgh, tens of thousands of people lost their jobs for no particularly great reason. We now have, I guess in South Alabama, Tyson Steel, a German steel companies, come back here to make steel. It involved, I think, for U.S. Steel a decision to invest, in which they chose rather to invest in oil. It's easier money. When I came to Birmingham, I think I came in toward the end of the day, and I went to the mass meeting at the 16th Street Baptist Church, which was the headquarters of the demonstrations, and of course, to hear Dr. King speak, we all have our own vision. It was quite extraordinary. Dr. Abernathy spoke, and he kind of spoke as a just folks kind of man. He was a reverend, but he kind of spoke sort of man-to-man talk, and well, not elevated anyway. I think he and Doc were very close, and I guess he thought that he could reach people by being more just folks. Anyway, but Doc spoke in a most eloquent way, and of course spoke about at this time mobilizing people. Now, what we know was going on is that the movement had lost out on getting people to go to jail. Any community just has a certain number of people, and for whatever reasons, how you get people, how that fever of not caring about your personal self and wanting to enter history, how that happens to people is very mysterious, but it wasn't really happening here in Birmingham at that moment for the movement. But we know that Reverend Bevel and some of the core and SNCC people, these are old friends of mine, Mary Hamilton, Ike Reynolds, and of course Bevel, were meeting with and educating school children who were very, very excited about doing something. I mean, we know, I guess, psychologically, children understand the social reality very quickly, and the parents, whether they explain everything or not, tell them how to behave with white people, all of that. And they had to, of course, know that that was wrong. Anyway, you can't just have people, if you believe in nonviolence, go out and just demonstrate. They had to be taught and trained and come to understand that it was very important to be nonviolent, and it was very important to act in a decorous way. You couldn't bring a knife or a stick or whatever. There was, I'd love to hear from any members of the community here if they remember being schooled. But in any case, the young people were very anxious to participate and were being trained and inspired. Bevel was a very, his life had a tragic end, but he was a very inspirational figure and very confrontational. And so at this point, I think, when this photograph was taken, the children had begun to go out, and a certain number had been arrested, and I guess it was, I don't know what the police made of it, but it was bewildering. For one thing, the kind of brutal hatred that racists were capable of was very hard to direct at young people. They were not very nicely dressed. They marched in a very, very nice way. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me follow the pictures. When King spoke, people were really very enthusiastic, and he spoke in a very, kind of elevated way, and but somehow or other people got what he was saying. I mean, his PhD thesis was on the possibility of transcendence and immanence. Well, most people wouldn't get that, drift of that, but what it meant was the possibility of the ideal in the real, which was really what the movement was about. The idea that your ideals could transform the real world and make it much closer to what it was supposed to be. And that was very central to the idea of a beloved community. And whenever I meet people from the movement, there's some sort of understanding that we all have touched, had this experience of having the ideal actually enter our real lives. Anyway, you can see how enthusiastic people were. Here's one of my favorite pictures, but she liked what she was hearing, and it was very inspiriting. And one of the functions that Doc and the young people had is that many, many people were fearful. I mean, the system of segregation was a terror system. And we all, we talk about it, in words, but now all of us have been exposed to terror, and we know what it means. And our brothers and sisters had to live with that terrible system for, an unconscionable period of time. Anyway, the example of the young people, the example of Dr. King going to jail gave common average people courage. And they were models. And once the demonstrations really got going, many, many adults who were hanging back were so inspired by the young people that they were willing to go to jail. There was a famous businessman, I guess the owner of the motel I was at, and he was on the fence and had questions about King being there and stirring things up. After all, he got his credit and did his banking at white banks, and he felt pressure from them. But when he saw these young people standing up and also being terrorized, his mind was made up, and he became a very determined member of, the black leadership. Well, here is one of the great people from Birmingham, Reverend Shuttlesworth. I did, I guess, photograph him when I was here, but he was at the March on Washington, which was the result of the Birmingham demonstrations. We went to Washington because Birmingham, the events at Birmingham had so disturbed the president and the nation. Jack Kennedy was the first president in 100 years to say that segregation was wrong. And the images coming from Birmingham sickened him. And so the March on Washington, the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 were a direct result of the demonstrations here. So Birmingham, in a very real way, is the turning point of this, civil rights movement, and was, in my mind, one of the last battles of the Civil War. I know you marked the Children's March, but I would encourage you to, I know the South has a whole history of reenactments, and this was the Gettysburg of Birmingham, was the Gettysburg of the Civil Rights movement. Anyway, Shuttlesworth, I saw him, and I'd like to know him a little bit, he was a Bantam. He was very determined. He knew that segregation was wrong and the situation was wrong. He was extremely impatient, and he was the moving force that got Dr. King and the SCLC here, so he has to be a great hero for the community. And I saw him. I came back to Birmingham, and I guess just before he died, and I guess he was quite incapacitated. But in his prime, he was a man on fire. He was very angry, very determined, and very, very impatient, as well as should have been. This is a meeting at it's the same meeting at the 16th Street Baptist Church, but you get a feeling of people were very, very, they filled the hall and very eager to hear what was being planned and to hear the word from Doc. But it was standing room only, and people were very excited because this was serious business. And there's he's the greatest man I ever met and got to know. I guess I heard him speak many times, and particularly in his church in he would very much voice his fears and apprehensions. You know, I don't know if you all think about him very much, but he had a very, very difficult life. He constantly traveled, mostly to raise funds and to lecture. The Nobel Prize said that he traveled something like 24 million miles, which was the equivalent of about 40 flights to the moon and back. And he, 3 or 4 days a week, he was away from his home. He was arrested 31 times. He was stabbed, beaten up innumerable times. People would just attack him. I mean, they would see him and he wouldn't defend himself, and he didn't have bodyguards, and he would try to reason with people who were hitting him, and, you know, say you need help. Someone said? What? Oh. He lived in constant fear. I mean, some days his phone would ring, you know, all day. People were going to get you, you know, kill you, whatever. How he endured all that, I had the occasion of earlier this year to meet his daughter Bernice, and she said that when they did an autopsy after he was killed, she said his heart was that of a man who was 80 years old. He died at 39. So he paid in some way, but you know, I guess we all are indebted to him. Now, here's, I guess this is the beginning of the Children's March pictures in a way. These are some of the young girls who were at the meeting, and they're deciding about whether to go to march. And, you know, I mean, I guess you're 13, 14, 15, and you're deciding to go to jail. I guess it's not an easy thing. But, you know, they were all out there. I mean, but I think I guess, you know, you have to think of yourself. What would you do? It's very, very, very touching to me. Now, here's the, I guess the 16th Street Baptist Church, and the young people came out in very energetically, very enthusiastically, and often singing and carrying picket signs. And they had been, you know, they had reported to the church and gotten organized and came out in a very orderly and very proud and extremely energetically. And of course, I mean, I always love this picture because they've arrested these, they can't be more than 10 or 12, but their character, the policeman has taken their picket sign, so he's doing the picketing, he's doing their job for them, don't buy segregation. And you have to, I don't know if you know the details, but the movement had concluded that they had delayed the demonstrations for many, many months, waiting for an election to be over, and they thought that the political situation was too difficult, So they focused the demonstrations and their demands on the stores, wanting to desegregate the stores and get jobs for some of the black employees, and also try to develop better racial relations in the city on issues like all the parks were closed at that time because they had been desegregated. I'm Rick Roll, I'm a photographer. This day, Dick Gregory he was arrested. Was he arrested the first or the second day? Do you know?
Oh, first day.
Well, then I was there the first day, I guess. Well, maybe he got arrested twice. Anyway, as you see, there are older people with the young people, which was, I think, intentional to have some sort of leadership and some support for the young people. But they weren't reluctant to, they were chomping at the bit to go. I always find this very touching. Look how young these people are and how committed they are. And this fellow wants you to see his sign that segregation is sin. When they came out of the church, but they went different directions to try to confuse the police. The police had the area closed off, and the black area around Kellyanne Park and the church had policemen blocking off the street. So there were before the children began, there had been people trying to get down to the stores to picket, and it was very tricky and difficult. And if you were a white person living in Birmingham, you probably didn't know there was anything going on. The newspaper didn't report the demonstrations, or if it did, they were way in the back of the paper somewhere. But the young people kneeled down. It was, I guess, something they had learned. That it was, I guess, some sense that they were praying for the people who were arresting them. Anyway, this is, I guess, gives you the sense of the energy and enthusiasm. They're marching and they're proud and they're determined and they're ready to go to jail. They left the church and at this point they were being put on buses. And I just love the sense of vitality and determination. Well, these boys can't be more than 13 or 14, I would think. And this, I guess, has come to be the famous picture of the march, because what happened is they're being loaded onto buses, and they were coming out in such numbers that they bunched up together, and you get a sense of the push and energy. But there's a gaiety here, and I think there's something kind of, you see here, they're going to jail and they're singing, and of course the policeman looks to me kind of mystified. He's sort of something crazy about sending school children to jail for for parading, really. But part of the part of the glee and joy of these young people, I think, is that they know they're playing a trick. I think the great writer and my mentor, Ralph Ellison, said, had a phrase, slip the yoke and change the joke. These young people are the Trojan horse. They're going to jail, but once they're in jail, there's no more room for any more of them, and the police are going to be immobilized, which of course was the great vision of all nonviolent activities. The dream of Gandhi was to immobilize the police so that the protests could be most effective. And this was Gandhi's dream in action. And one of the most radical things that ever happened in America, I'm not a scholar of the Children's March, but here visionary social activists have taken a bully and a venal system of segregation and completely made it not work. And so it was a great triumph. And maybe there's a lot of literature about this, but I think it was one of the most beautiful and essentially peaceful and transformative moments in American life. And there's Bevel, who was really the architect of all of this. He met with the young people, inspired them, and made sure that they participated. It was but from what I understand, the parents initially were horrified at the idea. I mean, what parent wants their promising young child to go to jail? But the children understood that this was a great opportunity, that this terrible black hole of segregation might just be released and ended. And they were very excited by the opportunity to have what they thought was freedom. And and Bevel was the one who understood that the children who, after all, had the most to gain and the least to lose would be what turned out to be the turning point in Birmingham. So unfortunately, his life became rather sad at the end, but we all understand. Well, revolutions, because I do so many of the leaders, churn up very strange people, and he was an organizational genius and had profound insight into social reality. Later on in his life, he had emotional problems, some of which may have been post-traumatic stress. I mean, the people in the civil rights movement were fighting the last battles of the Civil War, and they were warriors and paid a heavy price. Jim Foreman, I remember, who had been the leader of SNCC for a number of years, was quite mentally disturbed, and Jerome Smith, who was a very good friend of mine, one of the Freedom Riders, was very badly affected by it. And, these people fought in a war, and we don't recognize it as a war, but it should be. I think they, someone like Bevel should have gotten a medal for what he did, but that is not to be. Well, this is a typical. This is there were arrests all over town. This is at Loveman. Some people. These are older demonstrators who got downtown and I just thought, Khrushchev can eat here, but I can't. Why can't I? And that was part of the insanity of segregation. And as a photographer, one of the things was the trucks, these paddy wagons were all white, and of course the demonstrators were black, and so this was sort of the social system in a kind of it summarizes that this woman was locked into this system. And the same thing here. Well, that may have been you, this the paddy wagon was.
Yeah.
Is that you? One of the gentlemen here was a demonstrator, a young demonstrator, and he said he went off in a paddy wagon. Most of the people I saw went off in buses, but you must have been very dangerous. How old were you?
15.
15. Well, this is the facility at, I think it was the sporting field or
Bear Park.
Yeah, the park. Yeah. Anyway, that's where they were kept, and being kept in jail, and they had to wear their own clothes, and it wasn't, it was difficult, hard to keep your spirits up. They were, the excitement was over, and being in jail when you're 14 or 15 ain't much fun. And I'm not sure about that, but I think some people apparently had mattresses and others didn't. I don't, that's the way it appears anyway. And the parents, of course, were very upset. And this is some parents asking about their children. And as you can see, he tried to help out. Not everybody was rude or thoughtless. And I guess he's checking on whether they're here or what their circumstances are. And this is just to give you an idea that the police were trying to contain the demonstrations, and that they kept the people penned in. And that was very important, because at some point, once they'd arrested, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 people, there was their ability to arrest anybody stopped. And then the people could just flow downtown. They were protecting the stores downtown. This is, I guess, part of the response. The psychology here is very complicated, but I guess certain stores probably owned by black people kept white people out and had the sign as retaliation for the colored signs. They had colored only. Is that right, or Well, see, this says colored only. That meant they were keeping white people out of this, I guess it was a bar. Yeah, I mean, I guess that was part of the complexity of the system of segregation. Here are the dogs. I wasn't there when they actually unleashed them. I think this is the second day, and they been told, I guess, to stop doing that. There was, I mean, as I recall, the demonstrations up until that point, until the children entered into, were very orderly. Will Connor kept his cool. Pritchard, who dealt with King in Albany, had told him, you know, just do it by the book and don't get excited and don't lose your cool. But when the sea of young people came and is that me? Is that my heart? When wave upon wave, you know, I think 2,000 or 3,000 young people went to jail, came out, they didn't know what to do, and I guess they lost their cool, and with authority figures, you know, he reverted to attempting to control the situation, calling out the dogs and the fire hoses. I mean, as far as I could see, there was no particular provocation. Nobody was attacking the police or doing anything provocative. It was just what it really. There's the bull himself, and what I guess was at stake was by having all the young people come out and filling the jails and just seeing a sea of people, it was clear that this, I guess, battle of wills that the white establishment had lost control. The number of people involved had become, there was a sea of people. The jails no longer held any menace to anyone, and the control was lost over the of the black community, which was essential for segregation. So I think the white establishment of Bull acted instinctively to reassert control, and what he did was to start intimidating and frightening people, and he called out the dogs and the fire hoses. And the firemen, I understand, weren't that enthusiastic about this. Their job was to put out fires, not to control people. But for each, they followed orders. They worked for O'Connor, and so there were the young people were going to jail. A crowd had formed, and there were a lot of young people around, and so the police and firemen got very nervous, and they started using very, very high-powered, they were especially high-powered hoses that could peel the bark off trees, take people, knock them down, and clothes off, really, with the force of the hoses. So this is, I mean, I guess that for people in the movement, I mean, over the years, this became a shining moment because people were being, you know, knocked down, and I'm not an expert and nobody really would know, but I think had all this happened 20 years previous without the movement and without the effort to transform the social system and end segregation, everybody would have run away. I mean, you know, the police are there with the gun, you know, with their guns and with their hoses, and people would have just cleared out. But there was something at stake now. They were not, I mean, what the hoses were was intimidation. It was an attempt to terrorize them. And they weren't going to have it anymore. So as you can see in this picture, it looked like a war. You know, I was hiding behind a tree. I had never seen anything like this. I had never seen people treated so brutally and inhumanely. I was terrified and crying. I don't, you know, I'm not embarrassed to say that. There was as much water, you know, behind the lens as there was in front of it. But at first, people just, you know, they're running away and they're, but then they decided not to be intimidated and not to, you know, let Wool have his way. And they began to come together and hold on to each other. I'm just showing this and they formed a kind of a monument, really. And it was very serious. And this, of course, was became the, I guess, symbolic picture of Birmingham, the resistance, the determination not to be intimidated, not to be knocked down, not to... Anyway, this became the moment, and in the civil rights movement, from that time on, this photograph became the resistance, it was in many ways the turning point. Black people were no longer going to be intimidated and you know, be overwhelmed by police terror and power. And an old lady in Louisiana later that summer said, well, we really stood up in Birmingham. And that's what this picture really came to mean. And in movement, it was, you know, emblematic of many of these people were not in the movement or anything. They were just street people. Some of them were. I mean, some of them were demonstrators, but many of them were just, you know, from the community. And this woman, the great photographer Dorothy Lang, always loved this picture because it showed, amidst all that brutality, you know, some kindness and fellow feeling. And here are, these are people from, I guess, the majority community here watching. It's complicated. I mean, I've looked at this picture many times. Some of them are laughing. They're liking what they're seeing. Some of them look very troubled and upset, and you know, but they're not running to defend their fellow Birmingham community members. And at the 16th Street Baptist Church, this was, the black community watching, and you could see a lot of concern and worry and apprehension. And this is always a mysterious picture to me, but we all know that young black men, we all know it since Trayvon are an endangered species, and I guess this was a safe place to be. I guess they could watch what was going on and be hard to bother them up there. So I guess this is I guess a house for rent that was abandoned, and they're watching what's going on in comparative safety. Now, the firemen were ambivalent, and this is a much debated story. This is another day, it's Sunday, and some church members, people from the community were now riled up because of what had happened to the young people. And I guess they were just marching, I think, to show support with the young people. And I guess they came up to a place where they had to stop. And there were both police and firemen. Now, my recollection and understanding was that Bull Connor had told them to turn the hoses on, but they didn't have the heart to do it, or whatever. And this is what they were staring at. This is the frightening group of people that they're staring at, people out in their Sunday best. But anyhow, some humanity was registered, and these people were able to have an outdoor prayer, and I guess it would return to their church. I can't imagine anybody harming people out in their Sunday best, but this was I guess, a moment of humanity here in Birmingham. And I guess at the time I had a very complicated reaction to this sign, and I guess it has its own history amongst you all, and you probably understand it better than me, but it did catch my eye at the time, and I gather it has a complex history. I guess that's it.
We have time for just a couple of questions, and then if you would like to talk to Bob some more, I would like you to come out tomorrow night at 5 o'clock for the opening of his show of these photographs in the Visual Arts Gallery, and he'll be there to talk to you. So we have time for a couple of questions.
I have to put my prepared notes away.
What was the response of people around you as you were taking the photographs?
Well, it's not, I guess it's a complicated question. There was an old black gentleman who said, "You ought to get my picture." I said, "Well," we were running along the street here because there was a lot going on, and I said, "Well, you got to do something." And he said, "Well," he said, "I'm too old to get angry and too tired to run. But I must say, when I'm photographing, I get hypnotized. I'm not too aware of what's going on around me. A friend of mine, I did a story with a writer friend of mine. I was photographing Gabriel Williams. Anyway, he's a famous trainer of elephants for the Ringling Brothers. And he was leading 17 elephants in a row, and I was running backwards taking pictures of him with the elephants. And my friend said, didn't you realize that if you fell, you would, get trampled by the elephants? I said, it never occurred to me. There were, for instance, when the events began, when the demonstrating started, Bull Connor was terribly nice to the press. I guess he gave people sandwiches and coffee, and I knew enough to not have the coffee and the sandwiches. He was not somebody I wanted to eat. But at least the authorities wanted the press to have a good response and be agreeable in manner. Of course, Birmingham at that time had a court case suing the New York Times for slander. So, but I'm trying to think. Doc, for instance, was always very anxious for us to stay and to try to not intervene, not get involved in what was going on, but to photograph it, because the photographs were invaluable. They were the way in which the social system revealed itself. And it was, he said we had plenty of demonstrators, not enough photographs. I'm trying to think of, I did not, in other places I was arrested, beaten up, and things like that. Nothing really untowardly happened here. The press was, I think the general attitude was to try to get the press to see the situation as a disorderly one, and for the press to be sympathetic to what was going on.
One more.
You made several analogies to Birmingham being the last battle of the Civil War. Do you consider yourself a combat photographer based on your experiences?
It was a war. There's no question about that. I don't. It goes with the territory, but. I was beaten up, I was arrested, I was scared. Later that summer I did a story, it was Freedom Summer, which is thought to be 1964, was also 1963, and it was a core SNCC project, which was very much encouraged by the Kennedy administration to register black voters. And there was a man, a great man, Reverend Carter, Joe Carter, who lived in St. Francisville. And he was the first man to register to vote in a county that was at that time predominantly black. And no black person had registered to vote in the 20th century. And you still my heart. I was very, very fascinated and puzzled by how determined he was. I mean, he had apparently, for the last 5 years, every year tried to register to vote. And there were all sorts of complicated ways that had to interpret the Constitution or whatever was involved in it. Anyway, that night, he registered that day, and that night he knew that the Klan was coming for him, that they had told him that. At first, they didn't know where he lived. They didn't know in the back roads or something. Anyhow, they started to come down the road, but he and his neighbors were ready for them, and they were out in the fields, and as soon as they were just shooting up in the air, they shot back. And the Klan wasn't very brave or anything. They just turned around and left. But I was, well, because it was terrifying, I mean, just to be literally in a firefight. But I was fascinated where he got this determination to vote. And we talked at some length. I eventually did a story for Ebony, and I asked him, well, did you want to come down this road? Did you want to have it paved by the government? No. Was he interested in politics? Was he going to run for office? No. And anyway, we talked, and I said, well, what really is impelling you to register to vote? I mean, most of us take it for granted, but he said that he listened to television and he heard on the TV that you weren't a good citizen if you didn't vote. And he wanted to be a good citizen. He wanted to vote, and he wanted for the members of his community. He was had a little church, but I thought about it for a long time, and I realized what he was really saying is that you were no longer a slave, but you weren't a citizen, a full citizen, until you could vote. And so voting was not just, what Bobby Kennedy would get those black votes and sweep into office. It was just the idea that the last badge of slavery had been removed, and he was a full citizen. I mean, I never really had thought about